Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson, Labour's war on welfare. Just why is this government turning its fire on disability benefits?
The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel.
And I'm Yelda Hakim.
And we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
We're on the ground in some of the world's toughest places. Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yelda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.
We've now got 1 in 8 young people in this country out of work. 1,000 people every day are signing on to personal independence payments. 1,000 a day. That's over the course of a year, size of the city of Manchester. And we've got to make
sure. Now, that was the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, speaking to Sky at the weekend on the tricky issue of personal independence payments, or PIP for short. It's a scheme reportedly in the sights of his colleague Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, as she tries to reduce the amount this country spends on benefits. But given that PIP targets those suffering from long-term mental or physical health conditions, some are questioning if this is where the axe should truly fall. Let's start with Sky's political correspondent Liz Bates. At basics first, Liz, what exactly is PIP?
So PIP, it's a personal independence payment. It's a benefit that you can claim if you have a long-term physical, mental health condition or a disability. It's not means tested, and you can use it for helping you to live. So all you have to do is prove to the DUP that you have a condition that means you need financial support to help you live, to help you get about.
All right, but what is the issue? What is the problem that people have with PIP and indeed with any changes to it?
This is a benefit that was designed now a decade ago, and what the government has found is there have been a huge rise in the number of people claiming it. So the Health Secretary over the weekend was pointing to this one statistic, 1,000 new claimants a day of the personal independence payment. That means over a year, that number reaches a city the size of Manchester. Just to put it into context, that's how many new claimants are coming into the system. Now, what the government says is that they need to have a serious look at why that new number of people is coming in and maybe have a look at the reassessment criteria around it. The other aspect of it, and this is to save money, is they were planning to increase PIP in line with inflation, which would just mean that as a benefit, it would keep up with the cost of living. They are, I think, planning to cancel that rise. So it will remain at the same level, but of course, the cost of living will continue to go up. It is essentially a real terms cut. They will be hit, and many of those people do not have the capability to go out and work and make up that money. They just have to take that financial hit. And I think that is why a lot of Labour MPs feel really squeamish about this. They do not want to vote for something that will hit the most vulnerable disabled people in society.
OK, Liz, back to you just a little later for more on the politics of the plan. But before then, let's speak to Paul Morrison, benefits expert and policy advisor for the Methodist Church. Paul, look, PIP was introduced not that long ago in the grander scheme of things. So why? What did it replace?
So it replaced an earlier benefit called Disability Living Allowance, which essentially did the same thing. The difference between Disability Living Allowance and Personal Independence Payment is that Disability Living Allowance was based on what your diagnosis was, whereas Personal Independence Payment, its test isn't about what illness do you have or what disability do you have. It's about what is it you can do. Can you wash yourself? Do you need help to wash yourself? Can you walk 50 meters, or do you need assistance in doing that? So it went from this medical to this functional assessment.
And the reason for that change was?
Well, essentially, it feels very familiar at the moment because there was a lot of discussion about Disability Living Allowance costing a lot more money than it had done in the past. There was a lot of discussion about lots of people who maybe didn't need help were getting help. And essentially, it was designed to remove a fifth of the expenditure. In reality, what happened was they did all of these different tests and lots of people's lives were turned upside down. And they found out that about the same number of people needed help under the new system as under the old system, and those savings did not materialize. I think they wanted to save about 1.4 billion. They ended up saving less than 100 million, and that was mainly through adjusting the rates, not to do with changing the people on it. So it caused huge hassle and it caused lots of people lots of problems, but it didn't achieve any of its objectives in that respect.
I think I can take it as read that you believe this to be an unfair system then.
There is a real fairness in saying disabled people need more money because disability costs more money. And if you want disabled people to be fully a part of the society, you need to give them money. That is absolutely fair. How it's administered has not been a success at all. And it's largely because when we saw that lots of people needed support, what was said was, how do we reduce the cost? That it was seen as a budgetary problem rather than a human problem. And all the way through this process, it's the voices of disabled people have been kind of excluded. And I'm really concerned that that's what's happening again. And we'll end up in the same place with a different unjust system unless they are listened to.
The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says that around about 1,000 people a day are applying for PIP. I mean, first and foremost, do you recognise that figure? Does that sound possible?
1,000 people a day sounds about right, yes.
I mean, is there evidence of widespread fraud when it comes to dishing out of this particular benefit?
Absolutely none. Other than the state pension, I don't think there is a benefit with a lower fraud rate. Working age welfare costs about 5% of GDP, and it's done so for the last 25 years. So there's more being spent on disability and less being spent on unemployment. But actually, the total amount at this point in time is largely about 5%, as it always was. So if you want to reform benefits, it shouldn't be driven by money. It should be driven by how do we help people, to fulfill their potential. And that won't be done by misdiagnosing this as a financial problem. It needs to be diagnosed as a social problem with financial consequences.
So what is the fix to that social problem that you and many others, let's be honest about it, have identified?
The fix begins with listening to people who experience disability, listening to people who experience poverty, because I can explain all the different points in the policy that have gone wrong over the past decade. And there's a running theme from universal credit to personal independence payment have not helped. But one of the other running theme is that, frankly, the people who experience poverty were not involved in the design. So you had really strange things like the helpline for benefits was free if you had a landline or if you had a contract mobile phone. But if you had a pay-as-you-go phone, like most people on low incomes do, it costs 50p a minute. Silly things like that. If you had somebody who received benefits in the room, they'd have told you. But also diagnosing the problem and designing the solution needs to have people like that in the room, and it never has. And until it does, we'll just keep repeating the same mistakes.
So if you had the chance, to have 30 seconds in Liz Kendall, obviously the minister who's responsible for this, in Liz Kendall's ear, how would you persuade her?
Oh, I think I would spend a very long time thinking about my 30 seconds first. But I think I would persuade her by telling her a story. And I would tell her a story of one of the people who visits our food banks. I can remember somebody in a food bank who was collecting food for her family, but it was basically because she had a disabled mother living with her. And just telling me how she had got to this place and how much shame she felt about coming in, and how they were going to diagnose her as mentally ill, which is probably true. She had depression, undoubtedly. They were going to give her antidepressants, but they weren't going to give her enough money to live. And they had just cut her benefits such that she had even less money to live. And that's just the wrong set of priorities and the wrong way of dealing with this.
Let's head back to Liz Bates in Westminster for the politics. Liz, look, why does this government so desperately need the money? Why does Labour find itself having to look again at welfare and benefits?
This government needs to find money quite simply because they came in, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves said there was a big black hole in the public finances and she would have to look at every single unprotected department to make savings. And one of those departments that they've earmarked, in fact, it's top of the list, is the Work and Pensions Department and this issue of welfare, of this ballooning, rising welfare bill. They say they want to reform it and reduce the amount of spending on it. You're quite right, though, to say that it feels strange to have a Labour government coming in and making this a priority. One of the very first things that Rachel Reeves did, even before she presented her budget, was cut the winter fuel payment. That's to elderly people. I think they weren't expecting the level of reaction that they got on the doorstep about that. There was a lot of anger. These brand new elected MPs, people that had voted for them, were suddenly saying, gosh, is this really the first thing that you are going to do in government? You're going to hit elderly people. That is in their minds, and they don't want to relive that experience by taking money away from vulnerable, disabled people. And they certainly don't want this to become a pattern and for this to become a legacy of this government.
But similar to the winter fuel payment, PIP, as you've already mentioned, isn't means tested. I mean, why did Labour government just not say, do you know what, if you need it, you'll get it. If you don't need it, if you're financially well off, you won't. That would save them billions.
This is always a question around benefits. So the reason often that benefits are not means tested is because that makes them much easier and cheaper actually to deliver. The process of looking at an individual, assessing their finances and making an assessment of whether they are financially in need of a benefit or not is actually a very administrative and expensive process in itself. So this is an age-old discussion around means-tested or universal benefits. It's quite easy just to say, you're eligible, here you go, you can have this benefit. What happens, particularly around PIP, though, is that can encourage many, many people to come and claim this benefit. And that is why they have earmarked this area for cuts, because they believe that there is a lot of savings to be made.
Isn't that then perhaps the problem for Sir Keir Starmer and everyone else in the Labour front bench, that there is a narrative building up that Labour, the party of the working man and woman of all things, is not looking after those at the very lowest in our society?
Yes, but I think it's interesting, actually, Neil, the language that you've used there. And I actually think this gets a little bit to the heart of, it's very difficult to pinpoint Sir Keir Starmer's philosophy on politics because he's not particularly ideological. But we have heard time and again in interviews, and particularly around the issue of the winter fuel payment and when it comes to taxation, he wants people who are working to benefit from this Labour government. I think those are the people at the front of his mind that he sees. He wants to champion working people. He wants to make life fairer for working people. And so I think we're getting this constant message now from the government of they want to reform the welfare bill to get people back into work. They want young people 16 to 24 to be getting in to the labour market. If they have long-term mental health conditions, they want to support them to do as much work as they possibly can. Even people with physical disabilities, they want to work with employers to see if those people can get back into work. They really believe in work over worklessness. And I think if there is any philosophy of Keir Starmer and this government, it's that.
And that is your lot for today. Do remember, if you like what you have heard, give us a follow on your podcast app. Should only be a click, and you'll get the daily delivered to your devices just as soon as it publishes. We're back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.